Tori, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and what led you to your current place recording podcasts and with this course called Becoming the Modern NGO Leader?
Yeah, sure. My name is Torrey Peace, and I have about 12 years experience in international development and humanitarian work. And I think I first started becoming interested in leadership when I started supervising more than two people. And I realized I didn't want to just tell people what to do. I wanted to find a way to motivate them to find their own best way of doing things. And that made me find leadership. And I started learning all about leadership and became very passionate about it, which also led me to find coaching. And then through that, I started using it with my team. At the time, I had become promoted to be a country manager in Timor-Leste. And when I was using it with my team, like coaching and a coaching leadership style, I realized the impact that it had and motivating and empowering others. And so I decided to leave my NGO that I had been working for and start my own business. Since I left in like 2018, and then COVID happened, and then the whole social justice movement happened, and then aid started changing, or like people started waking up to, okay, we need to change everything to align more with the future that we want. And so I started noticing all these trends and noticing from my own work that there were certain things that were needed for humanitarian and development leaders to become what I call the modern leader. And so that's what led me to create both this new podcast that I have, but also the course.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, Ross, welcome by the way to the podcast. And I would love also to hear about your background and maybe you can introduce yourself and tell us how you found Humentum and about your work.
It's I don't know whether it's a super interesting story, but I left university and went as an environmental volunteer to Nepal. My degree was in environmental studies and geology, and ended up just holding a lot of training sessions. I didn't really know there were training sessions at the time. I came back to the UK after that and ended up working in a call center as you do, and ended up being a trainer there and realizing what I'd been doing in Nepal was in fact training, and this was like a thing that you could do. Unfortunately, I didn't really like working in a call center, and didn't it wasn't really fitting with my values. So I then was able to get a job as a trainer in an international NGO in the city I lived in, and I was there for a fairly long time, around 9 years, running their training department and eventually becoming the global lead for learning and development. So from not managing anyone to managing to leading a little, and then I've had a lot of soft leadership there. And then one of my clients was an organization called Lingos, who I used to leverage online learning. And then I was fortunate enough to get a job with them. And then I led the function for the e-learning, and I was also doing some training. And then we became Humentum, and I'm here. I think I've had about 7 jobs in Humentum since I've been here. So here I
Wow.
am now. So that's where I am. I'm now the director of client delivery. I look after all of our learning and consultancy products, trainers and consultants, and how we run projects and deliver them to clients.
Wow. That's quite a journey. And
Yeah.
maybe and maybe you can just because I think most people are familiar with Humentum, but can
Oh,
you just briefly describe Humentum for those who may not be so familiar with it?
yeah. So Humentum believes that charities, not-for-profits, NGOs, INGOs, environmental organizations working in the sector are pretty good at their mission. They're pretty good at what they're meant to be doing, what they want to do. Where organizations tend to struggle is in their operating model, like what happens behind that mission work, finance, compliance, HR, leadership, management. And so Humentum run training and consultancy to help organizations with that, but also bring those organizations together into a community and help them collaborate, work together, and share ideas.
Mm. So, on that note, as we're talking about training and leadership development, from your perspective, what would you say it means for someone to be a modern leader from a Humentum perspective?
I think it's a really hard question, and I often think that people talk about management and leadership like they're different, but really they're two sides of the same coin. And I think, you know, managers are often frustrated by perhaps people not in their teams not performing to the best of their ability, or they're frustrated by the environmental factors that are outside of their team. So, oh, we could do this brilliantly if we just could, if this other team would just get out of our way or do their job properly, whatever it is. And I think where the leadership kicks in is, how do I help the people in my team understand the golden thread of the vision, the mission, the strategy, and how they contribute to that and why what they're doing is important? And how do I get out of my team and go and talk to the other teams and the other leaders and try and find a way that allows us not to be in each other's way? And there's a lot of give and take with that. But I think that's the bit that for me is really important in leadership, and taking this kind of whole organizational view. I think the modern bit for me, because Humentum has no office,
Mm.
and our team is most of the world now. I think the it's Malaysia to maybe Guatemala is the most westerly now. It was Canada for a bit, but it's like most of the world. So when you're managing your team, those kind of traditional industrialist values just don't make any sense. Like, when is lunch break? Well, there isn't a lunch break. Like, can't expect the guy in Malaysia to have lunch at the same time as the team in Nairobi, right? That doesn't make any sense. So, and we're not in a factory where person A pulls a lever so person E can, pull a different lever. It's objectives, it's work done. It's not, were you at your seat at 9 o'clock in the morning? Did you have more than 30 minutes for your lunch break? None of that makes any sense because you can't see anyone. So it's
Mm.
really about managing by output and attitude and values much more than it is about, punching your time card and looking busy. Walking around with the clipboard's dead.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And a lot of that also requires trust.
Mm,
And one thing that I really like that you mentioned just now was about how sometimes we're focused on things outside of ourselves, but really, and especially in this environment, which is so dynamic at the moment with some of the especially like the more recently the funding cuts with the US government and so on, it's all the more important to look at what is within our sphere of influence, our sphere of control. And so for me, I think a modern leader, we talk a lot about decolonization, localization. I think even Humentum had a report about a global healthy ecosystem.
yeah.
And those to be able to create those things, we need to lead a bit differently from how most leaders are leading now, from my experience with coaching
Mhm,
hundreds of leaders. And
yeah.
so what I see is that the modern leader needs to set an example for others in how they use their time So, for example, prioritizing or set an example of well-being, caring for themselves, really focusing on the things that make the most impact and not the things that just keep you busy but not productive. And this then turn allows their team to do the same thing. And then the other thing is setting an example for others and how they lead. So, for example, not needing to be the one with all the answers, which is such a common belief throughout the humanitarian development world, that me as a leader, my team, my value comes from having all the answers, but rather how do you work through the team, not for their team. So rather than being the bottleneck, which has to approve and make decisions and everything else, empowering those around you through what I like to call a coach approach way of leading, which is not as natural to me. And from what I've seen, most leaders tend to use more management than leadership because of, they might not have ever been shown that before, or they might not have the skill set. But a lot of times, from my experience, leadership, it's something that can be achieved, but it's something that needs to be learned. And if you don't have an example, if you've never learned how to use coaching, for example, as a way of leading, there's a learning curve there. And so this is what I see as some of the skill sets of the modern leader.
I love what you said there, Tori. And one of the through lines to all of that, and you said it as well, is trust, right? And I think
Yeah.
you've got to be vulnerable as well with that trust, right? So maybe somebody on your team is better at doing a task than you. That's fine. And we've seen this in so many sectors. It's not just the NGO sector where technical experts get put into management positions because they're great technical experts. And what happens is that person may be a great manager, may be a great leader. They may also be a terrible manager and they may also be a terrible leader. But what you've definitely done is lost a technical expert who does a great job. But there's somehow, and it's that industrial mindset that like the people who are good at their job should be in charge. Well, the people who are good at their job should be good at their job, and good managers should be in management positions. And that, there's always, it seems like you can't have someone on your team who's paid more than the manager, but I kind of say, well, why not? Like, let's use value as a way of rewarding in pay systems. But to come back to the trust thing, you know, we spend as managers and leaders an inordinate amount of time trying to pick somebody for a job, like trying to recruit the talent. And then you get someone who you think is absolutely fantastic. And then you tell them exactly how to do the job that you just recruited them for. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me at all. And like at Humentum, we've got a real advantage that I can recruit from anywhere in the world. So actually, the talent pool I'm pulling from is huge. And we can get amazing people, not just people who live within 50 miles, like 60 kilometers of where the office is, but anywhere in the world. So if we can attract them, we can really get incredible talent. So how do I release that talent and let them do their thing? And
Yeah.
it takes a little bit of courage and a little bit of vulnerability to say, they're going to off you go. And there's a process to, allowing them more and more freedom to do their thing. But I think the same is also true with the traditional model of INGOs, where we spend all of this time looking for a partner, find a great partner, and then put them in a straitjacket.
Yeah. Yep.
I guess it works at so many levels, that trust thing.
Yeah. And what I tell a lot of leaders, especially when they start my course or the course that we're offering now, Becoming the Modern NGO Leader, is that as you go up, especially as you go up and up the leadership in your chain and you're supervising more and more people, your role becomes more about surrounding yourself with the right people and less about having all the answers.
100%.
And so that requires a lot of trust, like you're saying. And one thing that I wish I had had, Ross, because I worked for an NGO that was very much about working through implementing partners, which was wonderful. However, at the time, at least, we had no training on how to do that. It was just go and do it. And so, once again, kind of like what I mentioned before, what I found was that my natural inclination, because even after having a master's in business, we did not learn anything about leadership. We only learned about management. And so my examples from others, my mentors, and my training did not allow me to have the skill set to be able to empower the local implementing partners and having the right conversations and asking questions that will allow them to solve their own problems, which is exactly what was really needed. And so I would get frustrated, they would get frustrated. You try to tell them what to do, you teach them again, they're not doing it. Why?
Right.
And so
And
it's
it's
this
this
like
this like
cycle.
fear of risk and fear of failure that makes this environment. Where as soon as you accept that, guess what, things go wrong, right? Not all of your staff are going to get it all right all of the time, sure. And sometimes you're going to try something that's not going to work. Well,
Mm,
there's learning there, and actually the next time you do it, probably knock it out of the park. So how, as a leader at whatever level, do you allow mistakes?
yeah.
How do you dare to fail? And when it goes wrong, sit with that team or that person and understand why it went wrong and what you could do next time, and
Which,
use that as a learning experience
well,
rather than a stick to beat them with. Why would you do that?
yeah, and in that conversation is also a great use of coaching as a way of leading, which,
Yeah,
as if you can probably tell, that's what the modern leader, NGO leader does, is know how to balance the telling with the asking. And what I observe is most people do more telling than asking. And you're right, like a part of that is setting boundaries, like around how much failure is allowed here. Like, how can I set a
yeah.
boundary on like the
And
amount of
and
the
where
budget
is
or the
failure
time?
allowed and where
Mm,
isn't it? Right? We're
right,
not allowed
right.
failure in contracts, really. That's bad. Failure in this project might be actually okay, and being
Mm.
clear about that tolerance, if you will.
Well, I mean, if you want innovation, you have to fail by definition.
Yeah,
So,
the whole traditional structure is based on having zero failure, which of course encourages failure because you can't have zero failure. So, I think that's really interesting, Tori. How does the course itself help learners explore this approach where there's more trust, more freedom, knowing that Hersey and Blanchard situational leadership model, like when do you lead, when do you manage, when do you coach, when do you give freedom, how do you and that individual be at the same place, like what's the course doing to help people understand how to take that more coaching approach?
yeah, sure. So there are several steps that, like basically three steps I see to becoming a modern leader. And part of it is adopting more of a coaching leadership style, or what I call a coach approach. So, for example, I think, and I'm just going to back up a minute in order to
Yeah,
explain like the bigger picture
cool.
here. So, one is I think a lot of leaders, in order to, it's kind of like, that I don't know if you're familiar with Simon Sinek. He's like a big leadership trainer and role model for a lot of people, but he talks about find your why. And
Mm,
what I find is that a lot of times we spend a lot of time looking at project impact and our why in terms of our job description or what we're doing for our department or whatever, but we don't think about what is our impact we want to make as a leader. How do we want to be remembered as a leader? And so I think that is a first step in becoming the modern leader. And the reason is because when you are tested for allowing people to fail, when you are tested for you just want to tell them what to do because it's easier and faster, you have your why. So if you stick with your why, and what I find is like I had a student who once she had this vision, she realized, oh, the way I'm leading is not going to make this impact because I'm taking the shortcut by telling people what to do. I'm not allowing them to fail. And so I need to focus more on this impact I want to create, which is empowering my team, giving them more responsibility and so on. So I think that's a very clear and important first step.
And I
Mhm.
think Daniel Pink talks about purpose, doesn't he, a lot? And I
Yes.
think and
Motivation.
that motivation, that like,
Yep.
why am I here? Why am I doing my job? Like, people
Yep.
don't go to work to be bored and to do the minimum. Actually, people go to work to express themselves, and especially in our sector, go to work to make a difference in this world. And
Yep.
maybe as a leader, you just got to get out of the way and make an environment in which they can do that. And then when there's an exception, you can step in and help them and pick them back up and get them back going again.
I'm so glad you brought up Daniel Pink because it's also a video that I show in the course. Because
Right,
what I find is like his study, and it was global, right? Because a lot
right,
of
right, right.
times
Yeah,
we
I know the
think,
one. Yeah,
yeah, like we think this is only, it's a Western thing or a global North thing or whatever, but it's not. This is a human thing. This is human dignity, human desire for
right.
autonomy over our piece of the pie. And that requires empowering your team. You know, people
Yeah,
want to grow. If they're in a healthy environment, they want to grow, they want to advance. And this is a way to allow them to do that. So like having this vision of the impact you want to create is the first thing we focus on in the course. Then from there, what another thing that I've found, which has really prevented a lot of leaders from spending time on that impact they want to create,
hmm
is they are caught up in this traditional way of thinking and working. So a lot of busyness, the day-to-day activities don't align with where they want to go in the future in terms of the impact they want to create. But also there's certain ways of thinking, certain belief systems in the humanitarian development space, which are creating more busyness and more work, greater workload. And so overcoming those is our second step. So looking at ourselves, how do I help myself? How do I put my own oxygen mask on, like you talk
right.
about in the plane, before we help others?
That kind of
Uh,
finding space to lead and not just being busy, but being available, right?
okay, so this is funny that you say that because that's one of the common thoughts is I have to be available. And what happens is there's being available, like being available all the time, open door, constantly being interrupted and asked questions. And this is like one version of being available, right? There's
hmm
also being like, I would say more, because I think what you're trying to say is being able to spend time developing your team,
Yeah.
which a coach approach way of leading, you naturally are doing that through the way you're leading. So you're not taking extra time to develop your
No.
team. It's the way you lead that's developing them.
Yeah. I mean, I guess once you start to look at it this way, and if you've never done it, it feels wrong. And often, if new managers come onto the team, they're like, okay, well, let's say it's projects. How many projects should I manage as a manager? I don't want my team to do it all. And I said, well, you should be looking to manage no projects
Mm,
because the minute you're managing projects, if a project goes wrong, and it will, somebody will have a difficult. You If you're sucked into something else, you're not available for escalation, right? You're not
mm,
available for that. And it might be a coaching moment, or it might be a mentoring moment. It depends on, at least in my experience, where that person is on their journey.
sure.
Coaching somebody who doesn't know what to do can be really, I mean, practically doesn't
Yeah.
doesn't particularly help. A bit of mentoring there is super useful. If
Yeah.
they know what they should be doing but don't know the right direction, then I think coaching is super powerful. But yeah, you can't be so busy that you've got no time to do your leadership role.
I agree. And I think one of the reasons, ironically, that leaders are so busy is because they are so available. And what I guess what I mean by that is when you don't like, there were times when I was a country manager, I had to shut my door and say, or work from home and say, I need time to do this
Mm,
report. I need time
mhm.
for strategic thinking. I need time for some, you know, things that I couldn't be uninterrupted doing. And what
Right.
I see is leaders have this common belief, and this is one of the ones we talk about in the course. There are others that I need to always be available for my team, available meaning reachable at any moment.
Oh, okay,
Otherwise,
okay, yeah.
I am
No,
not a
that's
caring leader.
well, I'd have to get up at 9 o'clock Malaysian time and then work through until probably about 7 o'clock Eastern time US if I was to do that. So that isn't possible. Maybe it's easier for me than being in an office in a sense of being virtual because I can calendar block
Right.
and and
Yeah.
and people. I'm available for you in the day. I'm not might not be available right now.
Right.
One of the things the team and I talk about a lot is panic, right? Something goes wrong, everyone panics, and that is urgent is really important, and that is important is really urgent. Like, let's just take a breath before we dive in. So
Yeah.
often I yeah, that's the other thing, right? Someone else's panic isn't your panic, and often the panic isn't real. Although recently some of the panics have been very real. But yeah, not always available, but not so much work that you're never available.
Right. So what happens a lot of times, and especially positions like finance, admin, these support roles,
Mm,
is they see their role as having to be available all the time. And what that
right.
means is the work, like the concentrated, focused work, they end up pushing into after hours or
Right.
weekends.
Yeah.
And so, having permission or having the ability to set boundaries on your time, not to be uncaring, but what I say is actually more caring if you
Yeah.
set
Agree.
boundaries on your
Agree.
time.
You're more focused because you're not thinking about that thing you need to do tonight.
Exactly. Exactly. Because you can be more present with your team if you're not available. If I tell them, if you're always available, you're never available because you're always thinking about something else. There's always something else on your
Right.
mind. So that's
Right.
a big one that we work on in the course, is like how to overcome that mindset and set boundaries.
And I think that flips back to, Tori, what you were saying at the beginning, which is about being an example of how to lead, right? Like
Yeah.
having good
Yep.
practice, like not not emailing people at 9 o'clock your time, which is the new reality. Like, what time my time did I email you at, right? Which is the slightly more confusing than after hours, certainly for me. Like, and I think displaying that behavior, and I think there's sort of, I don't know whether everyone agrees with me here, so maybe I'm out on a limb, but I think there's microaggressions in it, which is like scheduled messages. So
Mhm.
I'm scheduling a message so it hits you not out of hours, but clearly I was working out of hours in order to need to schedule this message.
Right.
So, you know, really blocking out time, being really productive in that time, like getting your stuff done, plus having space and time to lead is the example you want to set because they're all leaders too, right?
Yeah,
They all
exactly.
need time to think. They all need a space to, oh, can I do this better?
Mm.
Why am I doing this? Does
Yeah.
this make sense? I should go and talk to that person. I can improve a relationship. They should all be thinking about that as well. It's not just you as a leader. So
Yep.
you should exemplify, if you will. And I think you're exactly right.
I mean, it's so funny how like leaders think, oh, do what I say and not what I do, but they're watching. I have a good example of this. When I was
Mm,
working in South Sudan, there was a leader who would always show up on Saturdays. And because that person was in the office and he had a like a very high rank, everyone else would also come on Saturday
To be
because
seen.
they yeah, to be seen, exactly, because they were there and they wanted to make an example of like, oh, I'm also here. But what they didn't know was this person was just sitting because the internet was much better in the office. He was just listening to jazz music all day.
Wow, that's the way you should spend your time, maybe. Yeah, and then sort of, we work in a very global world where not everybody views everything the same, and I think leave and holiday is another one that I've seen used very differently globally, and I've been to a number of countries and offices where taking holiday is not really a thing unless it's everybody on holiday.
Mm,
And so they go into the office on their leave day because internet is better, it's the comfy chair, the air conditioning is good, the tea and coffee is there, like whatever the reason. And so, you know, as a leader, especially if you've got a geographically dispersed team, you also need to understand all of those layers
yeah.
and allow people to be trusted adults who are
Mm-hmm.
intelligent and capable and want to work. And I think as soon as you adopt an attitude of, I think you're great, I recruited you because I think you're great, this is your job, tell me about what we should be doing, people really grow into that space. And I think the more you shut people down, the more they shut down. I mean, it sounds kind of obvious, but
Yeah.
you don't control everything.
I mean, one thing that I think also is important to remember is that you do have a lot of a significant amount of control in your sphere of influence, which is usually your
Mm.
team, right? So, sometimes people like they'll say, well, I want to do these things, practice well-being and setting an example for my team, but that's not the organizational culture. And what I usually try to encourage them is it doesn't matter. You
No.
can create through your own little sphere of influence, you can help the people that you're going to impact the most, and that is the most impact you probably will have as a humanitarian development leader is on your team. And
Mm.
so, you know, changing and being an example of the change you want to see through your team. And you can wait for your organization, but a lot of times that's going to take a while.
It's funny, isn't it? No one ever says that when they want to be this kind of toxic, dictatorial, like overlord. No one ever said, "Well, that's not the culture of the
Yeah, that's
organization." They
true.
just go do it.
That's
They just go
true.
do it. No, they don't ask for permission. They
That's a
just go
good
do
point.
it, and everyone's like, "Well, they get results or whatever it is while they're still there." And this idea of being more trusting, allowing people to self-fulfill, it feels like you need permission. But this kind of super traditionalist, like industrialist overlord, no one ever seeks permission for that, right? Does
That's
anyone
so
mind
true.
if I'm like, a bully? No, no, it's fine. So
That's a
it's
good
funny that
point.
no one ever asked permission the other way. What have you noticed, Tori, about the students on the course?
Yeah, well,
What
if you
what
don't mind, because I just want to just quickly recap
yeah,
the steps
sure.
that the course will take to help the leaders become what I call the modern NGO leader. So
Oh,
the
yeah.
first one is like what we talked about, which is having a clear vision of the impact you want to create. Because then you can take a step back and look at if is the way I'm behaving and what I'm doing now going to lead me to that vision. The
Right.
second part is becoming more aware of the way that you're using your time and overcoming challenges and using your time in order to start moving more of that time to activities that will create that impact, including developing your team. And this is also, activities such as spending time with your family or having more time at home and having more, let's say, well-being time. And I think just by default, having a vision, like a leadership vision, or just reconnecting with your purpose is motivating in itself. And then the third part, which is the final part of the 6-week course, is how do you share your power and influence with others? And that has to do
Right.
with, using a coach approach leadership style to help others find their own best way, allowing them, like you said, setting boundaries on failure, but knowing when to use coaching and when not to use it. Because you're right, sometimes it's not appropriate to always use coaching. But what I find is most people default to more of what I call consulting or managerial style because they don't know how to use coaching because they haven't been trained. A lot of times when I talk about the definition, coaching is used so broadly now. It's like become a lot more common in humanitarian development work, but it's also become very diluted in terms of the definition. So just to say that the definition that I use is coaching is basically helping someone else come up with their own best way of solving a problem or overcoming a challenge or
Right.
achieving a goal. And so it's not like, because a lot of times when people hear coach, they think of a sports coach, which is different.
Sure.
Sports coach tells people what to do, how to get better. No, leadership coach, how do you want to get better? How do you think you should do it?
Yeah.
So that's like the 3-step process to become a modern NGO
And
leader.
and
Mhm.
and what are the changes you've seen from people who've come out the other side of that course?
Yeah, so when we talk about how they overcome these traditional ways of thinking and working that keep them stuck. So that leads to greater productivity. I have students that have mentioned gaining back 4 hours or more of their work week.
Hmm.
Some even say they've gained back full weekends where they spend time now with their family instead of
Wow,
at
that's
the
awesome.
office. They empower their team members to take more responsibility. They listen more to others and have more empathy. And that leads to greater ideas. Throughout that 6 weeks, I can see them changing as leaders. And they
Mm-hmm.
come to the calls with these stories of last week, I was coaching my team and they came up with their own way of doing something. And they're so like shocked that it's so much better than what they would have come up with themselves.
Isn't that one of the great advantages, in my opinion at least, of online learning? Like this idea that training takes 5 days, right? There's so many 5 day training courses out there. It's unbelievable. Why are they 5 days? Well, because that's a working week. And we're going to schlep everybody into location A over the weekend, and they're all going to
Yes,
schlep
I
back
remember
in.
those days. Yes, yes.
But like the the idea of learning something and being able to implement it a little bit and then go back to another learning event and implement
Yes.
something else, or to go back to that course and talk to your course lead and say, hey, this happened, and that might be good or bad, I don't know, I tried this out. And so, well, the learner gets to try out 20, 30 different things if they want to. Whereas if you do a 5 day course and get back to your desk, I mean, you know what it's like. Everyone's been there, everyone's done it, especially these leaders. You get back to your desk, you've got 200 emails, right? And if you've got Messenger, Teams, whatever, you've got all of that to do. There's a bunch of people desperate to talk to you. You've got to try and remember what, two, three things from the course you want to implement. How are you going to implement them? It takes you a week after the course to breathe again. And then you go like, what was I going to do about it? And it's gone.
Yep.
The idea of
So
this
true.
like drip feed just gives leaders space and time to try stuff out.
It's so true, Ross. And I love that about online learning.
Mm,
And the other thing is you have people from all over the world that can come together for this call and then go back to, their
yeah.
activities, whatever. But it's not as disruptive, kind of like what you're saying, but also like this, and especially what I love about teaching leadership is it's real time learning. Like it's not something where I'm learning about this particular method of monitoring and evaluation that I will use in 3 months from now. It's
Right.
you're
In time.
learning and then you're immediately applying and you
Yeah.
can see the impact. Like as long as you're not on holiday for 6 weeks, you will be applying what you learned.
Right. And it's that, it's experiential, right? Because you might try a few things out, but then you might see leaders doing other things around you and think, oh, I like that. And then you start to like, once you understand that this is this is a technique, these things have labels. Once you realize that, you're like, oh, they're doing that thing. And so there's there's people I've done leadership and management courses with. They're like, oh, I still do that thing, but then I notice no, they're still often people carry around particularly the first few management and leadership courses with them for a very long time. It lasts
Mm,
a number of years.
mm,
I remember doing one and going back to you talking about time, and I talked to this manager about setting objectives and letting people work towards the objectives that are whatever you want to make them, monthly or quarterly. And he literally came back to me 6 months later and said, look, I don't care what was in the rest of the course. This one thing around setting objectives has changed my life because
wow.
they used to do a task and then come to me and do a task and then come to me. And then I would look at the task and give them another task, you know. The Oliver syndrome, this is probably a very UK reference, but, please, sir, can I have some more? And he said, I just give them stuff. And then at the end of the month, they just bring me all this stuff that's done. And I've got way more time to do my work, and they're doing better work. And he's like,
Yeah.
it's less effort and it's better. And I'm like,
Yeah,
that's
that's
just that.
amazing.
It's that one thing that he needed, and he never noticed it because he'd never taken that time out of his incredibly busy day. And he was a
Mm,
great manager, actually, but he'd never taken that time to think about this stuff that he spent
mm,
all day doing. And sometimes I think, 6 weeks with these little moments of reflection and learning,
mm.
you only need 1 or 2 moments, and you can change the way that you're both fulfilling yourself and others in a way that you work. So it's super cool.
Yep. Well, there's two other things I just want to mention that make this course unique. I've been teaching this course in some variation or other for about 4 years now,
Uh-huh.
and I've taught hundreds of leaders globally, all levels of supervision or leadership, and from UN, INGOs, NGOs, and also all departments. So like
Mhm.
programming, admin, finance, operations, all of them. And one of the favorite parts of the course that people love is I pair them up with an accountability partner throughout the course.
Sorry, that person's on the course or in their
It,
in their
they're
environment.
they're another peer that's taking the course at the same
Okay, cool.
time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so they meet every week, and I have a different discussion guide every week based
Mhm.
on what they've learned. And so once they go and they practice after because we have a call where I teach on the call and they practice on the call, but then
Mm.
they go and on their own time, they meet with their accountability partner after they practiced, and then they discuss further, they practice further. And people love that because they learn from someone else who might be in a different country, a different
Right. Yeah,
organization.
that's so cool.
And they also keep each other accountable with keeping up the work week to week because, we every week we learn something new. And
Right.
then the other thing is I have an alumni group. So once they graduate, if they graduate successfully, they're allowed to join the alumni group. And the alumni group, we meet once a month so they can continue to bring, like I just had a meeting and I had students from 3 years ago come to this call with questions like, what do I do in this situation? Or I
Like
want coaching on
an
this.
action learning set
Yeah. So they
where you
continue
bring your
to,
problems.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So they
So cool.
continue to learn after the
I
course.
love the idea of having this safe place to fail as well, right? Because the other challenge that leaders have is, yeah, I want to try this stuff out, but I don't want to look weak or make a mistake or look stupid. in front of these people that are looking up to me, and so or it's culturally unacceptable for me to like try stuff out like this. So having that safe place to give it a go before you do it in reality and just try it on for size
Mhm.
is really cool.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I have some accountability partners that are meeting 3 years later still. So they just
That's
got so much
incredible. And
value out
that
of the
really
relationship.
shows impact. So the course
Mhm.
is 6 weeks. You have an accountability partner,
Mhm.
and you can continue afterwards. What's the rest of the format look like, Tori?
Yeah, so the main part of the teaching is on a 2 hour call every week. And that's a live call, which I encourage everyone to attend because that's where we're going to be practicing. That's where you're going to be learning. And then you can bring questions. Like once you apply, you come back and bring more questions like we talked about. And I try to make everything so it's no more than like 4 hours total a week. So the 2 hour
Right.
call, 1 hour with your accountability partner, and 1 hour to apply assignments, which are also things you do on the job. So it's like
Mhm.
all while you're already working. It's not like you're taking extra hours to do these
Right.
things.
It's integrated into what you're already doing, and it's less than an hour a day.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
And I guess the more you do that, the more you get out of the course. The less you do that, the less you get out of it, right? The more of
Yeah.
yourself you give.
Yeah. I mean, especially because I think of the accountability partner model, I do find that most people apply at least part of what they've learned and they come back with questions. And also, once they see the impact of what they're learning, that
Mm,
they see the way their team responds, they see that there's an immediate change, that they're more motivated to continue and grow as a coach approach leader and modern leader. So it's really exciting.
Tell me a little bit about your experience with people coming on the course, hearing you say all of this great stuff, and they say, that's fine, that sounds great, and I imagine you're really good at that, Tori, because that's kind of authentically who you are. But that's not authentically who I am. I'm not that kind of manager, that kind of leader. How do you make sure that they can stay authentically them, which I think is super important,
Hmm.
but also change.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. And actually, the question I usually get is less about my team has strong personalities or my culture is what's preventing me from trying
Mm-hmm.
this leadership style. And so we talk about that in the course because it's very common, like a lot of
Sure.
people bring that. And we talk about how culture, there's different types of culture, right? There's your country
Yeah.
culture, there's organizational culture, you have family culture. And a lot of this is all about like what we've learned, what we believe. And so, how do we look at some of those things and try in small steps what you feel
Mm,
comfortable with or your team feels comfortable with, like occasionally? Because what I usually tell them is start with a team member who you know will be open and receptive to this,
right.
and then once you're comfortable and they're comfortable with it, then you can start to expand. And probably also the other team members will be watching and noticing. And then you'll have somebody who can talk to their experience and the benefits of the style and so on. So yeah, I mean, most leaders, I think the issue they bring up is more about their team and less about them, even though sometimes a lot of it is about their own
It's,
limitations.
I think that's really great advice, and it is hard. There are many different working cultures across the world, and management is viewed very differently.
Yeah.
Uh, even continentally, it can shift radically, let alone and even in a country, right? There's no reason to say that the north and the south of a country or the east or the west of the country have the same ethics and culture, and
Yeah.
there are subgroups to the subgroups to the subgroups, but everybody goes to work to feel good. Doing a really good day at work, in my experience globally, makes people feel fulfilled and needed and therefore happier. And people who don't like their job and are just like doing what their boss tells them and they don't really like their boss, they're less happy at work. So,
Yep.
I think you've got to take all of this stuff and interpret it to, we talked about a couple of theories, right? They're all Western theories, everything we talked about today, like the stuff going on in other people's cultures, in other people's environments, that is just as relevant. Old stories and ways that elders have led and exemplified leadership are
Mm,
all super relevant here. The
sure.
question is, are you thinking about it? Are you trying stuff out? Are
Yeah.
you trying to do better? And how are you leading your people in a kind of conscious way?
Yeah, such a great point. And one thing that I see a lot of people I think bring up is like, for example, in a more hierarchical culture, like I think even recently someone from Nepal actually was telling me, oh, well, this is how, in our culture, this is how it's usually done. But what we find also is they say, but in the NGO culture, this is more receptive. The way that you're telling me to lead is actually more well received than the government, for example. Like if I was
Right.
working in the government, it would be very hierarchical. I wouldn't have any autonomy or less autonomy, for example.
That's right. Yeah.
Whereas if I'm working in an NGO, it's almost like this is more of the culture of an NGO.
And a
Yeah.
family business might represent any number of cultural approaches.
Mhm.
I think that, you know, if you get people to sit down and write down what they think the attributes of a good leader and a good manager is, and what the attributes or the behaviors of a bad leader slash manager is, globally, in my experience at least, people come up with pretty similar lists. How you
Mhm.
get to that endpoint can be quite different, but the endpoint is kind of always the same. So I'm always warmed by that. Do you think that way of leading is good or bad? People tend to sort of roughly agree. Whether
Mhm.
they think it's possible or
That's
not is a
yeah,
completely
I
different thing.
think you're right there. Back to human dignity, right? It's like
Right.
a human need or desire, and the way that we grow, the way that we have autonomy over our own ability to do things, and less about like one culture, one way. So yeah.
Right. And everybody is a unique individual, right? And the quicker as leaders, managers, we just accept this fact and say, well, all of these people on my team, regardless of their background and how culturally sort of homogeneous they are, like they're all individuals. Everybody's an individual, and everybody has a unique skill and talent to bring. And
Mm,
providing you're recruiting well, you've got a really good team. Let them go do their thing, and you're the facilitator, and in some cases the shield to allow
yep.
that team to self-fulfill.
Yeah, such a great point, Ross. So I want to just start wrapping up because I know that we're we're starting to go over time. So I do have a question for you that I think is somewhat relevant, and then I can speak to it as well. But like, and given all the change that's happening right now in
Yeah.
the humanitarian and development sectors with all of the things with USG funding, as well as many other things that are happening in the world, how do you think that a modern leader, let's say, can manage this uncertainty with their teams?
It's a great question, and I'm sure there's many people with a better answer for this than me because this is moment defining, right? This is a seismic shift, and my whole career in the sector, so the last 24 years, we've been saying we need to change the sector. Everybody's been telling me this. Like, the need is greater than ever. We need to be better at what we're doing. There are fundamental problems. Does this lead us to that? Is this the uncomfortable event that allows us to change? I don't know, but as leaders, I think you have to accept that change is constant. There's no
Yeah.
there's no getting around it, and no one likes that. No one likes that truth. Not really. Everybody wants something to stay the same. I'd like it summer all year round, and it's just not, and it's unfair. But the agility to understand the need to change, the the stoic nature of, like, what are we trying to do here? Everybody in the sector is all, roughly speaking, trying to make this world a better place. Like, let's not lose sight of that. Let's hold on to that ultimate purpose, but be agile about how we fit into that, and
Mm.
understand that you and your team are going through a moment of unprecedented change. And it's really, really, really complicated and challenging for everybody. And no matter how little or not people are, or how much people are affected, there's just a lot going on. And on one day they may feel one way, and an hour later they may feel differently. And as a leader, you haven't got to solve that. Well, you should empathize and understand that, and just, I don't know what everybody's doing. Probably everyone has a better idea than me. I am trying to do the next most practical thing and identify what that is with my team, and then go get it, and then just
Mm.
try and keep everybody pushing for that thing. And this too will pass. What about you, Tori? Any advice for me and everybody else?
Well, I think you already mentioned a few things that are worth pointing out. One is empathy. I think that's so key, with not only empathy for our teams, but empathy for ourselves in this moment, and doing what you need to do to take care of yourself in order to be able to take care of others. Like, for me, that's been getting off of social media and the news and just having time to be able to, like, for me, I mean, I feel like right now I'm going through a sense of like a grieving process. And that's part of the first part of being able to accept that this is happening, this change, and being able to move through that to the other side. But also, I think another thing that is important is around kind of what you also mentioned, which is, where's the opportunity here? Like, looking at our mindset, right? The mindset at this time can be very, very important, because focusing on what we have control over, which it sounds like what you're doing with your team, is very important in this time, because it gives you a sense of empowerment. It gives your team something to do, and a sense of empowerment. And one of the things that I teach in the course is how much our thinking impacts the way we feel and what we do. And that in turn leads to a certain result. So being aware of your thoughts, of your mindset, doing what I like to call thought downloads, where you just write down all of your thoughts on a sheet of paper so you can see them in front of you. Because a lot of times we have thoughts that we're not even really aware in our heads, and they
Yeah,
might be impacting us in some way and leading us to not take action, or to take action in a way that we don't want. So I think all those things are really key right now. And of course, first, prioritizing taking care of yourself, because if you don't
100%.
do that, you can't take care of others.
And the stress and the pressure that comes with leadership positions at this time is immense for so many people. And you know, I don't want to make light of what people are facing right now globally. It really is incredibly challenging. And I encourage all those leaders making really, really, really difficult decisions that you can only do your best, and you just really must take care of yourself
Yeah.
as well as you can in order for you to be able to help others as well as you can. And I think so many leaders are so selfless that, you know, they forget about themselves so much. And it's really important that they take care of themselves at the same time as everyone else.
Yeah, and yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a great point. I also think that sometimes when we are sacrificing ourself and we're being like what you call like we think selfless actually ends up being more selfish in a way because we end up not being able to help others and help, you know, like to be able to do the things that would really make an impact. And so, yeah, like we talked about earlier in this interview, like really walking the talk. I think Humentum also is very much about walking your talk.
That's one of our core values.
That's one of the things that attracted me to you guys because when I interviewed Christine, so she was
Oh, okay,
talking
cool,
about
cool.
walking your talk, and I
Yeah,
very much believe in that as well. And so, you know, how can you walk your talk during this time?
yeah. I think you've got to look at, you know, yourself, your own, if you will, personal strategy, vision, mission, values, like how are they aligning to what you're doing right now? And if you're doing something that doesn't align with those, then how do you set that with yourself?
Mm,
But also your organization. And you know what you're whether that's a whole organization or a function of that organization, you know, what are those values that you stand by, and are you still exhibiting the the behaviors that you want to exemplify? And if one of those values is, let's say, honesty, then you know, being vulnerable in front of your team as a leader, I mean, not all the time,
mm,
right? That's I'm
mm,
not encouraging that, but there are moments where you can be vulnerable and say what you're feeling, and it's okay. It's okay because they all know that, you know, if you're an organization who's been receiving funding from another organization or directly from Aiden, and now you've had a massive funding cut, it's hard,
mm-hmm.
and for you to pretend that it's not is unfair to everybody because they all know anyway and they want to support you. So
Yeah.
I think, you know, saying what you're going to do, doing what you're saying, and you know, applying your own values as best as you can, as often as you can, is what I would say.
Yeah, I love that. So maybe we'll wrap up on that note, Ross. Thank you so much. This has been really fun
Yeah,
discussion.
thank you, Tori. It's
Yeah.
great to come on the podcast and chat with you.
Yeah, and I'm very excited about our partnership together. I look forward to this course and I think it's in May.
That's right, it is, and you know, I think if anyone was interested in any part of this discussion and wants to explore any of it further, they should definitely, you know, sign up and explore it. And I think the other thing is just to remind everybody that if you did do a leadership course many years ago and it was super powerful, like imagine revisiting that stuff and maybe exploring some new stuff and just having time to reflect and reset, especially in these difficult times, could be a really important thing for you to do for your self care as a leader. So I encourage everybody to really think about the impact this could have on them and their day to day.
Well said. Thank you, Ross.
All right. Thanks, Tori.
All right.